I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I love to see the great participation that we're having on this first of our summer series of webinars. I am Ruben Felipe. Most of you know me. I'm the executive director of the Connecticut Charter Schools Association. And like I just mentioned, this is the first webinar in our 2020 summer series. We have heard and had conversations with many of you, throughout this pandemic, and of course, more recently as we are, moving into reopening planning, and we have many of you have cited concerns regarding reopening for the upcoming year and the guidance or lack thereof from the state on how that should be proceeding. And so we hope that this first webinar will provide a space for us to learn and collaborate from each other, and also from our facilitator today, who I will introduce in just a moment. And so I just want to put a plug in for the fact that we will be having a series of webinars. We have 3 scheduled at this point, and you guys have been invited to all of them. We cherish your feedback so that we can add webinars onto the schedule that you find informative and helpful. Our next webinar, which I will remind everybody of at the end of the call, is on online hiring. So again, I hope that these are helpful, and we really encourage you to give us feedback so that we can make sure we're bringing you information that's helpful and that you find valuable. So with that being said, for today's conversation, we have Leslie Joseph. He will present his model and plans for reopening for the next year. As he does this, we'll then shift to a discussion. Before we dive in with Mr. Bernard from Coney Island Prep for our conversation, I just want to share a couple of quick updates. If you're reading the weekly emails or were on any of the calls that we had recently, we've talked about a July. What started out as a June special session, and now has moved to an end of July, potentially the week of the 20th special session. That seems to be moving forward for the 20th tentatively. The legislative leadership has relaxed the rules for legislators to vote and introduce new policies and procedures that makes us feel like they're getting closer to an actual session. I will quickly say that session is intended at this point to deal with COVID response, including expanding the use of absentee ballots in the general election, and some policing measures and reform measures. And while there is movement from Senate Democrats, most notably to include education and other forms of inequity, that has not at this point been added or determined. So I just want to mention that. I also want to mention that we have had at this point more than a half a dozen Zoom meetings with legislative leaders, including the chairs of the Appropriations Committee, to twofold, continue to ensure that there isn't a cut, that the state of the economy isn't used as an excuse to cut the charter line item and per pupil funding, while simultaneously continuing the work that we started at the beginning of the session on per pupil increases. So that work continues. We have been updating you. We will be updating you. And lastly, SDE is conducting a Q&A session tomorrow about the reopening. Depending on how today and tomorrow's engagement go, we may request a follow-up meeting with SDE to answer additional questions that are charter specific with the chairs of the Education Committee of the Legislature, Representative Bobby Sanchez and Senator Doug McCrory, and also with the Commissioner and his leadership. So we will keep you posted. But let me pivot quickly to our facilitator for today's webinar and just give you a quick background, and then I'll turn it over to Leslie. Leslie, we were just chatting about this a little bit, was born in Brooklyn, New York, and raised in Queens. And he is an educator, an attorney, and a social impact leader. He's a chief executive officer of Coney Island Prep, which is my home neighborhood, or the neighborhood I was born and grew up in. He's a K-12 charter school. It's a K-12 charter school serving over 1,000 scholars across 3 campuses in Brooklyn. Leslie began his career teaching 5th grade in the Bronx through TFA. Before joining the founding team at Coney Island Prep as the school's first dean of students, he has also worked as an associate at the law firm, and I'm going to butcher this name, and I apologize, Leslie. Scadam, Arps, Slate.
We can skip all that good stuff.
Eager Foam. All right. I do want to mention some of these things because I do think they're important to mention. That you served as the managing director at the Harlem Children's Zone, where you led a portfolio of 8 programs serving more than 4,000 students. And so those of us who are familiar with Jeffrey Canada's work in Harlem Children's Zone know how important that is. So I will skip through the other accolades, of which there are many, and turn it over to Leslie. Leslie, thank you so much for joining us and facilitating this conversation.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Anna. And thank you guys for having me. And thank you for joining on a Wednesday afternoon in July. So to everybody who is on the call or webinar, thank you guys so much for coming. And the first thing that I will say is I am definitely not an expert. I think I'm in the position of many of you guys, which is trying to figure out how to run our schools and do right by kids in these incredibly uncertain times. And so I do, as much as possible, want to facilitate a conversation that is helpful for you guys and present our plans only so much as they're helpful for you, and not presenting anything as sort of like, this is the answer or this is the right way, because I think we're all truly trying to figure this out together at the same time. So if you haven't taken an opportunity to, please drop questions directly in the chat, or if you are able to unmute yourself, I'm not sure if folks are able to, but please raise your hand and feel free to jump in directly. I'm going to present a little bit about our school's plans and how we've been approaching this. I'm going to share my screen. If you are not on video, I will talk through it as best as I can as well. But before I do that, just want to sort of frame the conversation with a couple of broad-based, I guess, guiding principles to start off. The first thing that I would say is whatever it is that you are waiting for from the state, whatever level of clarity that you think is coming, it is not. It doesn't exist. I think we are all experiencing a little bit of shock in seeing our incredibly developed and rich country sort of fail in its level of response in terms of coordination. Thankfully, like, we benefit from being in states where there is improvement. I know Connecticut is one of the few states in the country where the number of confirmed cases of COVID is dropping. New York is one of the few states in the country where levels are remaining relatively flat. And so we're experiencing the dual realities of being in the Northeast, where there is simultaneous leadership and lack of clarity. And that's not true in many places in the country. So the first thing that I just want to say for everyone is, I know we in many ways feel like we were doing this on our own, and we were waiting for a little bit more clarity and a little bit more support. And I think the sooner that we realize that that level of clarity and support is not coming and we have to rely on each other, the quicker that we can get to making some really strong but well-informed bets about what we think is going to be true. So with that, I'm just going to sort of start walking through some plans, and then hopefully you guys will also have some additional chat questions that I can see and be ready for as they come in. So just a quick overview of what we're going to go through. I'm going to share with you our framework, how we have been thinking about this response. We're going to share some resources about the research that we have done to inform some of our decisions, and then preview some of the key decision choices that we've made around designing our school and our instructional framework to start, and then show you some samples of some schedules and things that we've looked at in terms of rotations for hybrid models. All right. So the first thing that I'll say is that these plans are not developed on our own. We've been having conversations with lots of other charter schools in the city and in Brooklyn We've been fortunate enough to have a board member who is a partner at McKinsey who has shared some resources and staffed a team with us to do some best practice research. And we have been in constant communication with our authorizer, very limited communication with state officials, some communication with city officials. And while those conversations haven't necessarily yielded lots of clarity and fruit for us, it has let us know that folks are in the same boat that we are, and that the quicker that we could come up with strong plans, the more we could guide the conversations to what we think is feasible and what will make sense for kids in our organizations, in ways that inform the decisions that are likely to come. So this is what we settled on. In narrowing down what we felt like were going to be the biggest drivers for success, we ended up on 7. So the top row you're looking at are really operational considerations. So health and safety protocols, equitable access to technology or tequity, and the logistics and execution of how we plan to run our campuses. And then the instructional considerations of what the design and delivery model would be, how we were planning for trauma-informed practices in this incredibly tough environment, especially for so many of our low-income kids and our Black and brown kids, what staffing and support would look like. And our family members are very much going to be part of our staff, guiding instruction for kids day to day. And so that has been a huge part of our guiding framework. So health and safety protocols. We have been doing a ton of research, again, with the support of McKinsey. And I think as we have seen sort of the language and the clarity come out really in the past couple of weeks in the US around the importance of face coverings, small group batching, physical distancing, and the aerosol nature and the airborne nature of this virus. That's definitely informed our plans. But I think part of what's helped us make these decisions, make some of the decisions that we've been looking at, is a lot of the international research that we've looked at, which we'll be sharing with you guys also at the end of this call. So for our health and safety protocols, these are a couple of the different drivers. Cleaning protocols, health screening, and limited sharing, I'll start with those. From what we know of the virus, from what we've seen from research, the most significant driver of the virus is actually person-to-person communication or person-to-person transmission. There isn't as much confidence in direct surface-to-surface contact. And obviously, we know that there is lots of asymptomatic transmission. So the cleaning protocols, the limited sharing, and the health screening, while these are incredibly important, we also know that they are not the most important things. So hand washing protocols and hand sanitizer, we think that's going to be really important for us. But at the same time, to the extent that folks are not going to be in lots of contact with each other or in contact with lots of limited surfaces, these are really important, I think, to make sure our staff feel safe, parents feel safe, and our kids feel safe. If there was anything that we thought that people could afford to save money on, it is things like non-contact thermometers, which we have spent money purchasing. And we are figuring out ways to have this as part of our health and safety protocols. We're doing this because we know it'll make people feel safe. But I think that for bang for your buck, screening just for fever at the door is not going to be the most important thing in terms of your health and safety protocols. The number one thing that we've seen from both doctors and international research, I think, is protective covering, so making sure that people are wearing face masks. If you look closely at the CDC guidelines, from what we've seen from our research, the CDC guidelines tend to be the floor. Lots of states have been more progressive or more aggressive than the CDC. Most countries are as well outside of the United States. The CDC recommends wearing face coverings when feasible, and sort of using that to make sense with your age and your population. At our school, we've had the debate internally on our leadership team about whether that makes sense and whether it's going to be possible for all kids, including students as low as in kindergarten, to wear a face mask at all times. What we are starting to learn based on sort of indoor transmission is that it's probably going to be that we're asking people to wear face masks at all times. Small grouping and batching is incredibly important also in order for us to keep our schools open. We want to make sure that we have protocols and systems in place so that we are limiting transmission and infection on campus. So if it is possible that, we do learn that a kid has the virus or someone in their family has the virus, or that somehow there has been transmission on our campus, we want to be able to shut down an entire small cohort of kids, either 10 to 12 or 15 students, and that teacher's been in the classroom with them without shutting down our entire school. So that small group patching is going to be incredibly important to help city and state officials facilitate contact tracing, but also helping us stay open and helping parents and teachers and kids feel confident that we're proactive and that we're limiting any contact or spread. Physical distancing also means that we're going to have lots of different protocols. Obviously, there isn't going to be high schoolers at their lockers or transitioning on their own in hallways. You can imagine the desk configuration is going to look very different, and there'll be fewer students in classrooms. We're going to try and stick to 6 feet as much as possible, including adding physical barriers if that's the only way that we can have slightly more students in the classroom than the 10 to 12 that we think is possible. And there'll be lots of new daily systems, including staggered dismissal, arrival with fewer students on campus, no handshakes or things like that. So I'll just stop there on the health and safety protocols just to see if there are any questions for that area of our blueprint doc. Looks like everybody now can join and unmute themselves if they have a question too. Feel free to stop me midstream if something does come up. So I think the next big question that is on everybody's mind is both the puzzle of in-person remote learning and how we actually make sense of it all and maximize the number of students who can be on campus while keeping everyone safe. The first thing that I'll say is I would encourage you to do with your schools and your leadership teams is figure out your prioritization of which kids you want to have on campus the most. It took us a long time as a leadership team to come to grips with the fact that these were all not great choices, and we wouldn't be excited with whatever we came out with, but we would try to stick to the best we could as long as we were in agreement with the priorities. Sounds like somebody wanted to unmute themselves. Feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt if you have a question. So a couple of things that we found in our research, and that was confirmed obviously in our own experience. First, there are some kids who are just, as a cohort and as a group, are not going to be as successful as they could in remote instruction. And those tend to be younger students. We looked at some online-only charter schools and some other folks that specialize in remote instruction and found that there really is a limit to the amount of hours of instruction that you can provide remotely for scholars in grades K1 and 2, our younger babies, versus obviously our older high school students. So our first priority was having our younger kids on person and having that direct in-person instruction as much as possible. We also sort of know anecdotally from our own experience that getting our kindergartners used to a charter school day is tough. And we really need that every single day in-person contact to establish real strong routines. So we wanted to have them in person as much as possible. That was our first sort of priority. The second, our school has about 24% of our kids have IEPs. And so I think for us, figuring out a way to serve our special needs population was going to be really important, knowing that they have not fared incredibly well with remote learning so far from what we've seen this spring. From there, our third and fourth priority were really kids in our transitional years, 11th and 12th graders on their way to college, 5th graders who are new to their middle school campus, 9th graders who are new to their high school campus. We wanted to maximize in-person instruction for them as well. And so we built our parameters around that, trying to figure out how we manage it all with space and classroom availability. So I'm gonna give you our sort of high-level example and break it down for you guys as much as possible. For our lower elementary scholars, they will be in person the most or have remote instruction the least. There'll only be 1 day of remote instruction for kids in grades K through 2. 2 days remote instruction for our upper elementary kids. Our middle school students will have remote instruction 3 days a week, and the schedule will vary by person. And then our high schoolers obviously will have the most remote instruction. And the reason for that will become a little bit clear when you start to see how we're using our on-campus classrooms and resources. And on the right, you can just sort of see how we have prioritized which scholars get the most in-person instruction. So just to break it down, so our school has 3 locations where we serve about 1,000 kids. 2 of those locations are co-located with the city, so we have significantly less control over that site. We don't know when we'll be able to access that site. 1 location is our private facility. It's 294 Avenue T, and that's our current high school space. What we've opted to do in order to have K through 2 on campus the most is effectively move the rest of the elementary school out of that space and just said that our elementary building is only going to be available for grades K through 2. That gives us the space to spread out those students over all of the classrooms on that campus and have kindergarten on campus for the full day, first grade on campus for the full day, and second grade on campus for the full day. Our staffing model had at least 2 teachers in the classroom for kindergarten, often 3 teachers when you consider the amount of our special needs students that we had in the building. So we believe we're going to be able to have classrooms of 10 to 15 students per teacher. 10 students per teacher really stretches us in terms of our staffing model. We won't really be able to have any teachers be excluded for health reasons. As we get to 12 and 15 students, there's a little bit more flexibility in terms of staff, and we can really cover all of the student population. If all of our elementary school students taking over that campus, we needed to figure out what to do with our upper elementary. And effectively what we said was they could take over part of our high school campus 3 days a week, which means our high school would only have access to their campus 2 days a week. That 2 days a week, though, is going to be split by students. So only half the kids are going to be able to come in per day to get instruction, and we're prioritizing the younger grades. 9th graders, for example, where they're going to be large groups of kids taking Algebra 1 or English 1 or Introductory Foreign Language. And the upper level courses like Advanced Chemistry, Advanced Bio, Advanced Foreign Language, they're really small class sizes that can be held online. I'll see if there are any questions for our campus configuration, how we're delivering online instruction, before showing you some sample schedules.
I have a question.
Yep.
I believe in Connecticut, they're telling us all kids every day. So I don't know if we have this kind of option to do anything like this.
So I think the first thing that I would say is local transmission is definitely going to be a huge driver. In Brooklyn, in Coney Island, our zip code is the top 5 in the city in terms of, unfortunately, death rates for COVID-19. So if New York City is the epicenter, Coney Island is definitely not the safest part of the city in Brooklyn. So I think for us in particular, we knew pretty early on that we would not be able to come back in person. I could imagine it varies differently depending on where you are in Connecticut. I imagine.
I think that's the whole state. I mean, that was the mandate, to make a plan with all people back every day. And then also hybrid plans. But I thought the hybrid was more for the parents who opted not to send their children or who had medical reasons for the children not to be there. That we have to run concurrent online and in person. That's my understanding. I don't know if other people have different understanding, if they read it differently.
Yeah, I mean, I would.
Yeah. Oh,
Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, Ruben, did you want to take it, or Anna? Did you?
Yeah,
want
no,
to
I was just going to say that I think the guidance that was put out, which requires, which has no requirements attached to it that are going to be mandated by the state. Certainly, the framing of the language in that guidance spoke to in-person education, but I think that's part of what we are going to try to clarify tomorrow, because my interpretation, I think our interpretation internally of reading it, really said effectively, here's what we think you should do. Now go ahead and do whatever go put a plan together that we're neither going to regulate nor are we going to approve.
I
think
I would only add, Ruben, that my read of the guidelines are actually aspirational, and that framing of all students back in person is an aspiration, and that actually every other piece of the document is about essentially eroding that absolutism. And so I think our observation as the Connecticut Charter Schools Association is that those guidelines are insufficient, and that your first priority should be to make a plan that you and your school community are literally can live with, right? Literally. And so, yeah, so Barbara, this is everything in the document is guidance, and there are very few things that are requirements. And as Ruben said, people are going to be expected to submit something. Those documents will not even be reviewed or approved. So I think that if there are things in Leslie Bernard's mental model or the Coney Island Prep model that appeal to you, I don't think that you should be thinking about them as being totally off limits, because the other reality is that if the infection rates change over the course of the next 6 weeks, that absolutely will no longer be the priority for the state that schools are back in person.
Excuse me. This is Monica, Common Ground. My understanding of the call the commissioner had on Monday with the superintendents, which I think several folks on this call were on, is that we are absolutely required to submit a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, where plan A gives all the option to all students to be in school every day. And specifically, Dr. Tracy, the superintendent in New Haven, asked about a hybrid option that she had sort of thought through and asked if that was an acceptable alternative. And he said, that is a great alternative for your plan B hybrid model, but you must submit a plan A, which is all students every day. And it's based on sort of community transmission and, and where the situation is, we may be instructed to sort of shift from A, B, or C. But I would love for more clarity. If you all get it, that'd be really helpful. But that is definitely not what's been communicated so far. That we're flexible past that mandate.
I'll just sort of quickly chime in there again without not having been a part of that call and knowing the intricacies of Connecticut, other than reviewing the overview of your state plan. A plan A of everybody on campus, the way I would imagine it, is almost as close to business as usual as possible. I think you're really then only tweaking at the margins, where it's face masks for students, lots more hand washing protocols. But I could imagine, like all of you would be incredibly frustrated by the idea of trying to manage how you conduct breakfast and lunch and meal service with every single student in their classroom. So I wouldn't kill yourself over a plan that you believe puts kids' lives in danger, particularly if you know that parents aren't going to send all of their kids. You might be able to predict and survey your parents and note that if all kids are coming back in person, you might be able to predict what your actual attendance is going to be, and develop plans that say, look, on a regular day, our attendance is 92 to 95%. If we're asking every parent to be in person based on our survey, we think the maximum is 80 or 75%. That hopefully gives you guys a little bit of flexibility. We saw in the last couple of days before our school shutdown, before we announced our shutdown, and we announced even earlier than the DOE, our attendance at campus was 72 to 78%. So I don't know if that's helpful for you guys, but just a word of encouragement there, especially if you're getting guidance that feels antithetical to what feels safe and makes sense for your families. I'm going to preview some of our campus by campus schedules, really high level. These are just about who is on campus when, while taking some of the questions from the chat. So one of the questions was about how do we develop these plans, who was involved in making those plans, and how are they shared? And so the first thing that I would just say is that Coney Prep is non-unionized. So our senior leadership team, I think, took on the bulk of developing the high level non-negotiables for every single school and every single campus, and making sure that we felt really comfortable about that. We've also defined what the deliverables will look like for each campus in terms of where there should be changes based on the location. We have shared our high level plan with teachers in town halls. So we did a preliminary overview where we fielded questions with teachers about how remote learning was going. We did surveys and things like that in the spring. We had a town hall and we updated people that, we wouldn't be giving full raises this year. But then we had just a discrete specific town hall on our back to school model for folks before they left for the summer. Some of what went into the model was informed by people's answers and responses in those surveys. So teachers' voice was incorporated, but not directly in the creation of these materials. Principals and school leaders have also been incorporated as we sort of outline non-negotiables and as we're defining the deliverables. So I hope that helps for that question. Just really showing you quickly the schedules. I showed you K through 2 would be on campus 4 days a week. This is what that looks like with Friday, still using the campus for some small group in-person instruction. This is where we prioritize those students with special needs, as I mentioned, for small group tutoring if they're parents elect, and we'd have staff PD. This is our upper elementary in-person 3 days a week on the high school campus. The way we did it for our middle school, depending on your class, you have in-person instruction either Monday and Thursday or Tuesday and Friday, and remote instruction on all the other days. Wednesday would be reserved for in-person small group tutoring. And that's where we're gonna target some of the students who perhaps have been struggling with remote instruction or have different needs. And so for the day-to-day schedules for specific classes and teachers and how that works, we're very much enlisting the support of principals and director of operations for the campus-specific schedules and changes. Same thing for our high school. They're remote on the days when the upper elementary is in person. And then we're gonna split the students into separate groups. Question about reducing course load or any other changes on how many classes, options, et cetera, that we would normally offer at the middle school and high school. Yes, definitely. I think PE is one easy example where we don't expect to be rotating lots of kids in and out of the gym, both because we're not going to be able to clean and because of what it would mean for that PE teacher to see all of those students in that way, in activities where folks are much more likely to come close together. So there are a couple of classes that we expect to offer only remotely in smaller group instruction. Our high school team is debating, we didn't feel great about having kids on campus only 1 day a week. So our high school team is debating a split day and thinking about whether they would want to do a 7 a.m. to noon session and a noon to 5 or 6 p.m. session to have more students sort of cycle in and out. So that would definitely limit the number of courses that are going to be offered. We expect some of our elective courses to be offered online only for sure at the middle school. Staffing and budget, I think, is really scary for us. I'm not sure what the Connecticut State Legislature has sort of teed off to you guys, but in New York, we are bracing for budget cuts of up to 20%. I think as a sector, altogether, nobody believes that the budgets will actually be cut 20%. It would simply be catastrophic. I think it'd wipe a lot of schools off the map. I'm not sure the DOE itself would be able to sustain cuts of 20%. So we are preparing for cuts as high as 10%. So that would mean we would have to find another $500,000 to $1 million in cost savings. So for us, that means doing things like eliminating retirement match if we have to. We've gutted critical parts of our budget, like I'm sure you have. We've eliminated field trips, after school sports and athletic programs. In our back pocket, we've identified sort of what category of teacher or staff member we think would not be able to offer them roles in the year. But for now, we've done as much as possible to get ourselves under budget for the upcoming school year. I think the biggest thing that we had to consider in creating class sizes was we couldn't have a sustainable staffing model with just 10 kids on campus and have them on campus as much as we wanted to with our full staff, knowing that some staff are going to have health exclusions. We had to look at class sizes of 12 to 15 to make it work. The only reason we feel comfortable with going to 12 or 15 is just factoring attendance. Even if we asked every single scholar to come or every single family to send their kids at a rate of 15 kids in a classroom at a time, there's going to be some folks who don't show up. And so we think aiming for 15 will actually land us at 12 to 13, and aiming to 12 will land us closer to 10. But starting from a place of 10 would be just really tough for us to even figure out the staffing question. For the other things that I think helped us in terms of budget was we certainly applied for the SBA loan, the Paycheck Protection Program. If you or your school has not applied for it yet, I would highly encourage it. There's still more than $100 billion left in funding, and can definitely point you to some resources if your boards need a little bit more encouragement and feeling comfortable applying for that amount. We felt like we were able to sustain our budget without the PPP, but knowing that we had that additional funds gave us a little bit more flexibility for doing things like purchasing face masks or thermometers or some physical barriers to put between desks and workstations. Feel free to drop more questions in the chat. I'm also trying to look at those while I move us forward a little bit, and just in interest of time. So the way we sort of look at it is we know that trauma is real for all of our kids. I think adverse childhood experiences always exist, but particularly now all of our kids have experienced some type of loss just by virtue of not having been in school and seeing their friends for 3.5 months. It's been really jarring for lots of kids. For our population, especially where 85% of our kids are special needs, lots of our kids come from immigrant backgrounds. We know lots of families are undocumented, not able to access resources. Lots of folks have lost jobs just because of how hard Coney Island has been hit. We can point to more than a dozen kids who have lost a parent or a grandparent in their home. And so we are planning for just sort of a different approach to trauma-informed care than we are used to. So we've developed a 6-part framework. We didn't develop this on our own. We just sort of changed the language to make it fit more of our school. It's heavily informed by research from UCSF. The framework is 6 parts. We're only focusing on 4 for this school year. So you can just sort of take a look at what we're focusing on for this upcoming year. We researched a couple of consultants for this and found some outside help and support. We found it to be pretty affordable in terms of what we were looking at for a consultant, both for training for deans of students, principals, social workers, and full staff PD, as well as one-off PDs for the full year. We found it to be pretty affordable, even in the face of these budget cuts. We don't have any plans to hire additional social workers right now. We simply can't afford it. But we are trying to figure out ways to increase our capacity, including onboarding more social work interns than we usually would. Our school wasn't at one-to-one technology. We have obviously since loaned out all of our laptops and iPads to support families. And we simply allocated more money out of our cash reserves this year to make up for it and purchase more Chromebooks and iPads, preparing for what we know would need to be true for the fall and be ready for going back to remote-only instruction. And just to quickly run through, since I know we're coming up on time, I want to make sure we have a little bit more time for questions. These are the other parts of our blueprint document that we're still building out. So updating our daily schedules, defining what meal service should look like. New York City is in a terrible spot right now with student transport participation, where the city does not have a contract with its Office of Per Pupil Transportation. So we have already signaled to our families that there's no busing and that they should plan for no busing. For staffing, we've relied heavily on things like EOC guidelines, Fair Families Act to help inform what we could and what we must do in terms of actually creating parameters about which staff members are entitled to health exclusions. What we have seen is that it's not going to be possible for us to create a remote-only work environment for every staff member who is nervous about returning to work. It simply would be unsustainable for us. So we're committed to providing what we must, what's required by law, of course, but that looks like anybody who has a health exclusion and anybody who lives with a family member who's also vulnerable. In terms of sharing the presentation, this entire deck, along with our background research, will be shared with you guys. That background research is I think it's like 130 plus pages. It includes scenarios from countries around the world and sort of best practices from places like Germany and Taiwan and Singapore. And it also includes the research on running a remote charter school from places all around the country, and gets down to the level of detail of what's the recommended hours of instruction remotely by age level. So all that background research, and this will be shared with you guys too. And the last thing I'll say about family engagement is we created a sort of tiered case management-like system of looking after our kids who we felt like would be the most support. And so we've identified the kids who are either struggling academically or who we know whose families are struggling. And each family, regardless of what grade your kid is in, has one point of contact by staff. And we have a sort of minimum benchmark of the amount of times we're supposed to reach out to a family. So I will stop there and just sort of express appreciation for the time and see if there's anything that I haven't touched on that you guys would want to cover over the last 10 minutes. And also I give you guys a chance to talk to each other if that's helpful.
Leslie, Bernard, first of all, thank you so much. Curious on the transportation piece, because I think that is also a little bit of a question mark in Connecticut. What has been families' reaction when you have communicated expect no transportation? You're muted. I was muted telling you you were muted, but you're still muted.
Three things: shock, frustration, a little bit of anger, gratitude that we told them this early. We shared that in sort of information before I think the city is explained any of its plan. And I think the third thing was some appreciation that we would provide MetroCard support to families. That's something that we feel like is affordable for us to be able to provide our families. We only provided transportation for kids in grades, for busing for kids in grades K through 4. Students already receive MetroCards. So really we're only looking at paying for MetroCards for parents who are helping kids in grades K through 4 get to school. And sort of based on what our numbers look like, one MetroCard for a parent covers multiple students. So it's going to be pretty affordable for us. I think the other thing that families feel comfortable with is that we've also shared this information with families. So I think people are sort of weighing this with the idea that they're not necessarily going to be needing to take all their kids to school every day. And so I think there's still definitely fear and concern from our parents, but having an opportunity to digest it and have months to digest it is helpful for folks. I think right now most of our families are like, thanks for telling us, but I don't know how to pay rent, and I'm worried about my job, and I'm worried about where to get food. And so this is helpful. At least somebody is giving us clarity right now, but we're taking it one day at a time, 1 week at a time. To David's question, if you are a charter school and you have a separate 501c3, then as a nonprofit organization, you are eligible for the PPP. The parameters of the PPP sort of, you only need to attest that there is financial uncertainty and impact to your organization because of COVID-19, which all of us have significant uncertainty because of that. We also sort of said, we weren't sure about the cost of face masks and protective equipment, the cost of technology and things like that we needed to run our schools. Because the state legislature also hasn't told you what will happen with your budget, it's also unclear for you what will happen in the future. And so for all of those reasons, you have a lack of clarity that you need to apply for PPP. And you have an extended period of time for which you shouldn't make staff cuts to turn that loan into a forgivable grant. I think the way lots of other schools and organizations have described it to us, which is simply, somebody was offering you a $2 million grant. Would you wait for it or will you hesitate? And this is actually a grant with relatively low strings attached, so I would strongly encourage folks to reach out for it. There is a reason why billion-dollar companies are going and grab this money. We are only doing ourselves a disservice if we don't do the same thing for our kids. The wealthiest organizations in the world are doing this right now, or if Harvard is going for PPP, we're really doing a disservice to Black and brown families if we're not going after those funds too.
Any other questions that we can get in these last couple of minutes that we have, Leslie? Well, I will say, Leslie, oh wait, we got one here.
Yes, our per pupil funding is only guaranteed at whatever level the state decides to fund it at this year, and we're expecting some decrease. And it's based on our enrollment. So one of the things that we have advocated for and that we're excited to see the city has sort of latched onto is this idea that any parent should be able to choose a remote only option. We're advocating for that because if a parent is too scared to send their kids to schools and just unenrolls them, then we are screwed in terms of enrollment. So we would strongly encourage advocating for that with the Connecticut legislature too. The other thing that we have said was, obviously because of our location, we were able to look back at what happened to our enrollment after Hurricane Sandy. And so we use a predictive model off of that. After Hurricane Sandy, we lost, I think it was something like 2% of our enrollment didn't come back. So this year we budgeted for a 3% enrollment loss. Typically our school backfills, so we usually have enrollment that is above our budgeted amount. This year we budgeted for a lower amount. We budgeted for 2% lower than what we would expect to have, and expect to lose 1% on that and not be able to backfill it. In terms of advocating for parents to have a remote only option, our approach was not to advocate it for ourselves as schools, but just to say parents need clarity. Parents also need support. Like there's so many articles right now about being both a full-time working parent and trying to educate your kids is impossible. And so being able to have the support of a school is imperative. And so it only makes sense, I think, for legislatures, for the perspective of their constituents to say, parent, you can still keep your kid enrolled at the favorite school and keep them at home and not worry. That school will still be able to support your student.
I think we got maybe time for one more. Well, let me say, Leslie, I really appreciate you spending this time with us. And I think, as you've heard, and in this conversation, and as I've in my conversations with many of you one-on-one and in other venues, the lack of clarity is perhaps the most frustrating thing amongst many frustrating things that schools are facing. So I really appreciate this perspective, this sort of neighboring perspective of how you guys are thinking about it and your willingness to share this, to share not just your plan, but your research to help inform in whatever way for schools in Connecticut. I will say to school leaders on the call, we encourage everyone to participate in the Q&A tomorrow with the commissioner's office in the hopes of providing even greater clarity, although I don't expect that we will get what we all need or hope to get. In conjunction with these opportunities to share plans from other folks, we are in communication in what I would describe as a very regular basis with legislative leaders, including the chairs of the Appropriations Committee and the chairs of the Education Committee. We hope to, coming out of this conversation and tomorrow's conversation, to schedule some time, as I said at the top of the call, with the chairs of the Education Committee to walk through the needs specifically of our sector, and sort of what the gaps that exist in the current guidance and what we get out of tomorrow. In addition, we are in conversations with SCE leadership to have a separate charter-specific conversation with them around the same subjects and many of the topics that have come up today, in addition to just how to reopen, but the impacts on enrollment and the per pupil, et cetera. So please participate tomorrow. Look out for invitation to those conversations. Additionally, I just want to plug another reminder that next Wednesday at 11 a.m. we're having another webinar on remote hiring. And so for those that are interested in participating in that, please join us next Wednesday. And please give us feedback, not just, certainly questions on anything that was presented today or that comes out of tomorrow's conversation with the Q&A with the department, but also to help us inform our next set of webinars so that we're providing the most useful content to you as school leaders. We certainly don't want to misuse your very valuable time. So I want to thank you again, Leslie. I want to thank everybody for participating. A video of this will be available along with the supporting materials on our website, and we could also email it to anyone and all of you. So reach out if you have trouble accessing that. And Anna, I don't know if you want to make any closing comments.
No, I would just reiterate. I think I would say two things that folks should email us early and often, and on two. Any category you want, but two in particular. If there are topics, resources, or presenters that you want to see in a format like this in the future, let us know. And then the other one is, to Ronell's point in the chat earlier about advocacy specific issues that are on your radar that you're worried about. So whether it's something like being held harmless for students who choose to participate remotely, despite the state's desire for everyone to be in person, issues of navigating transportation, with your district, which is always complicated, but will be additionally complex right now. We have a short list, but we want to make sure that our short list reflects the things that you're most concerned about, so that when we do have the time and attention of legislators, which we do have, we can make sure to put those things on their radar as well.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And we hope to hear from all of you and see you all next week. Thank you.